Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for August 29th, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about. It's episode 229. And, we've been doing a lot of heavy finance. We've been doing a lot of interesting stuff from that perspective. But this episode, post-Alaska, the everything that's been going on geopolitically, I set up a conversation with my good friend Xoaquin Flores, who's with us this morning. And we're going to talk about those things. But before I bring Xoaquin in, if you care about your liberty and the right to control your own future, I need to inform you of something upcoming that's very cool. From October 10th to the 12th, Mikhail Thorpe, host of the Expat Money Show, is bringing together top experts from around the world to the Expat Money Online Summit. It's completely free to attend. You'll learn how to legally protect your wealth, secure second residences and citizenships, reduce your tax burden, and own property abroad, all to safeguard your financial freedom. This year's focus is in Latin America, where the opportunity is booming. Argentina is shifting to free markets. El Salvador is undergoing a dramatic transformation, and Panama and Paraguay are offering simple residency programs. A plan B is no longer optional, folks. It's essential. So reserve your free ticket at expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com. Xoaquin, how are you?
How's it going, Tom? Good to be with you this morning.
It is good to catch up. We were chatting before we hit record about all the things, all the little chaos and everything that we're both having to deal with, and it's going to be interesting. So, but it was funny, when the Trump Putin Summit came together so quickly in Alaska, which was awesome, by the way. One of the things that everybody and their brother had an opinion on what happened is clearly there was shaping operations that were happening in the mainstream media, or I like to call the Nebojsian catamites of the mainstream media. Yeah. My community is really good at keeping me up to date with the salient points that you put out on a regular basis, simply because, it's hard to do so. And every time I read all these other people's opinions, and then there's a short post by Xoaquin about what he saw happening. And I'm like, so that guy's, as always, Xoaquin is correct about. So really what I want you to do, and I mean this sincerely, because when there's very few people whose opinions on these things I trust nearly implicitly at this point. And what I like you to do is I know what I think I saw in Anchorage, and then subsequently in Washington. But I'd like you to just go over it, and because I think it would be good in many ways to do a kind of post-mortem now that we've had a couple of weeks to see the reactions and see how everybody went home and have now decided what their course of action is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the setup going in, of course, is Russia is winning on the battlefield, right? That's what's kind of the background. And the Kiev, or whatever I think we're really talking about the Europeans and the British. There's divisions there, of course, but you can say the European side of NATO, so to speak, including the UK, definitely is having a problem articulating a very basic term and concept that's been around for thousands of years. It's called suing for peace. Suing for peace, and they just can't get this fucking word off their tongue. It's not coming off their lips or what have you. They're calling it, they want to push for a ceasefire, which is kind of strange. And then they're manipulating the fact that, peace sells. Everybody wants peace. People want peace in the Middle East. They want peace in Ukraine. Peace, 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 right? So no one can say that they're against peace. So like Putin can't say they're against peace. Zelensky can't say they're against peace. So that's this sort of underlying pressure. But in contrast with that is the fact that Russia's perfectly fine pursuing the military conflict. I mean, they're going to achieve their aims militarily. And that was true with Biden in there. And even if, I don't know how, but even if Kamala Harris had won the presidency, this is not about like Trump's deciding to be friends with Putin, or they have a friendship and now there's not a conflict, or there's less conflict. It's, no, the United States is out of 155 millimeter shells that they can give to anyone else. They're out of many things and they can't produce many things. You've got the drone disparity, like we talked about, the artillery disparity, the manpower disparity. You've got probably, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, numbers favoring Russian troops on the front in most places. And Ukrainian positions are being overwhelmed every day. if you follow the conflict closely, if you follow a couple of these, even deep state UA, pro-Ukrainian war tracker, if they admit it, it definitely happened, and
Right.
they are right, and so that's like a lowest common denominator, and they're showing just dozens of kilometers lost every day, settlements being surrounded, the Russian line moves. There's been since May or June an unrelenting, increase of Russian artillery and missile strikes deep into Ukraine, hitting Kiev, hitting Lvov, hitting military industrial complex sites, training, military training, places where NATO commanders are living and working, that are off schedule or, clocked out of being in the army, for that year on prolonged leave or whatever, but they're operating there in Ukraine and they're getting decimated and worse than decimated. They're being halved. They're being, so we're going into Alaska, and as you will recall, like the coming out of the Trump administration, Ukraine is kind of this inevitable thing that people might not realize how inevitable it is. For the Trump side, they're interested in having normalized relations with Russia, investments. You're talking about energy, you're talking about rare earth elements, you're talking about, of course, nuclear too. There's Iran, the Russians are going to build 8 nuclear facilities in Iran. The Americans can probably be invested in or on the board of directors of the company, which has a subsidiary in Iran and so forth. So this is like, right, why? So it's like everyone's on the same side except for the spectacle, the simulacrum, right? And yet you have going into Alaska, it was understood by anyone that's really following this that they're going to be talking about energy. They're going to be talking about the Arctic and Arctic exploration. I mean, the symbolism of the place, you're having it there in Alaska. And it's also saying, like, look, Russia and the US border each other. We don't need to go through Europe to talk. Europe is excluded not just symbolically but geographically, right? They're not, right. And how is Zelensky going to show up in Alaska? Like, he can show up in Riyadh, he can show up in Dubai, he can show up in Turkey in the wrong city like he did last time. That was hilarious for the headlines. Like, just so the headlines and people that just follow the headlines, like, oh, he was in Turkey for the talks. Well, yeah, he was in Turkey while talks were happening, but he was in Ankara and talks were in Istanbul, kind of a big difference. So,
Right.
but he goes and hangs out or whatever. And then his press team reports that he was there. He held a couple of important phone calls, which I suppose you have to be in Turkey to use the phone to talk to Turks on the phone. I don't know how that works, Tom, but but so we go into Alaska, and we're going to Alaska, and then we're hit with they're talking about Ukraine, and we were talking about, I'm sure you told your folks and we were telling our folks, they're talking about many other things. And then it came out from the Russian side, from Russian journalism, they're like, Ukraine will probably compose less than 20% of the subject matter of this talk. And we were like, boom, receipts. Like, we're talking about energy, right. We're talking about exploration, we're talking about sanctions, we're talking about, setting up joint interests. So, and so then we had Alaska, and there was, everyone was flipping out because it was a red carpet event, and it wasn't. And I don't even understand, Tom, how the media are talking about, like NBC or CNN or whatever, like you were supposed to be mean to him. Like, what are you fucking talking about?
You invited him to your house, and you're going to then you're going to shit on him? Like, are you
right?
kidding?
It was like, what? Yeah, it just makes no sense, And it's like these people are children and they're trying to expect you to be a child. So then we have this meeting, and as forecasted, they talked about all these other things that we understood that they would. And but they did also talk about what a outcome of Ukraine would look like. And what I think people don't really understand is that these are two men talking about the gravity of the situation. They're not talking about their fucking druthers or their fantasies or all these other weird things that you get from Atlanticist media press about Ukraine. They put these strange, what would you call them? I know there's a word for it, but they put out these strange maxims, so to speak. They put out these strange demands or like these are statements of principles and
Yes.
these are just lines that can't be crossed. And it's like, who fucking says? Like, what do you? It doesn't even make sense on the face of it. These are just, they have to talk. They're going to talk. There's a kind of a known outcome about Ukraine, and it kind of goes like this: like Russia is going to take all of fucking Ukraine. So any deal in which they don't take all of Ukraine is good for the other side, whatever that other side is, whoever
Right.
thinks that Ukraine, whatever. So then we get into this understanding that, okay, if Ukraine can agree to these things that Trump and Putin talked about, then you have the basis for maybe Zelensky and Putin to meet, maybe with Trump, maybe
Mhm.
without, but we can have this Putin Zelensky meeting, right? Now, reliably, the media has been lying to us about that was just supposed to be a given. Like that was just like somehow that was earned by Zelensky by the fact of his fucking breathing or whatever.
Right.
And then you have, right, and as if their side, Bankova, is supposed to not respond positively and appropriately to Russia's concessions. And I don't think people really understand that what Russia proposed there, you know, they actually were very reasonable in terms of they went in saying, look, we're not interested in a ceasefire. We're interested in framing the direction of things towards a peace, a lasting peace. In other words, these are our demands for the war. You can, buy your way out of this by making a deal with us, and we're still going to achieve our objectives, but at a lower cost to you. Maybe a lower cost to us too, but a much lower cost to you, right? In terms of, blood and treasure. And if you pursue the war, you're going to lose all of Ukraine potentially. Within 3 years, it's all gone, right?
Mhm.
So if you're going to have any Ukraine, you can say that you've gone home winning something on the Ukrainian side. And what the Russians did is they went and they did something very interesting with their proposal. So they said, like, well, you will recognize as part of Russia, and we're never going to argue about this again, Crimea, Lugansk, and Donetsk. And we will probably entertain pulling out completely from Sumy and
Kharkov.
and Kharkov. And as far as Zaporozhye and Kherson, we can agree that you don't have to recognize it as
That's in the, yeah, that makes sense.
so.
Right.
So that's actually kind of like a ceasefire concept with those. So it's like peace on these regions and ceasefire on those regions, right? So it's kind of a hybrid. I called it a peace fire.
Right. That's interesting. I hadn't actually heard that because what was interesting to me, Joaquin, and thank you for all of that. It was great. What it's clearly obvious is that no one wants on the Davosian side, for lack of a better term, wants to sign any kind of peace deal, any kind of treaty, because then you have a legal transfer of property, and then any aggression from that point forward puts the moral responsibility for the aggression back on NATO, and NATO never wants to play that game. They always want to blame the other guy by walking up and doing the I'm not touching you thing. No, really, I'm not touching you. And there's like, two kids fighting in the back seat and while dad's not looking and thing. And that's what they do. And they know, and the Brits know this game because that's all they ever do. And you can't have that scenario, which is why I think why Putin was willing to come to Alaska, because he also got a guarantee from Trump at that point that he's not going to Trump's not going to put troops in to Ukraine either, and say, look, we do this, you get legal certainty over, what you've earned, right? And then they have to then figure out a way to make you into the bad guy again. Meanwhile, we start to open up the process of normalizing relations, which is going to make it much, much, much harder for them to open up the conflict again without looking like the bad guys. And what did Trump
That's
do?
the
He
gist of
brought
it.
them to Washington to struggle session them publicly. And so they all had to wear their I don't kick puppies shirts, as my friend Dexter White would put it. Like they're all part of the I don't kick puppies club, right? But to your point about everybody wants peace. Like it's like that moment from Miss Congeniality with Sandy Bullock. What do you wish for? Stiffer sentences for repeat offenders and world peace.
And world peace, right? A boilerplate, man. So yeah, and then coming out of this, so then we have now the what came out from Yermak and Zelensky was just, nonsense. And they're being told by the British, like, you have to keep this nonsense line. And then you have to kind of deconstruct, like, actually, who is Zelensky valuable for, right? Like, in other words, his brand is ruined, like he's the worst possible person to be in charge of Ukraine right now from the point of view of the British or the Europeans who need to rebrand this war and reframe this whole conflict, because we understand that Zelensky's mandate is expired, the forced mobilizations are unpopular. People are kind of tired of his shtick, by the way, as well. And there's a lot of complaints about Yermak and others and how, their attitude and their ego and stuff. And they've been under advisement from another country in the Middle East whose name I won't mention, but they've been under strong advisement from them about how to do the sort of, secret, how to manifest, talking points, how to manifest results based upon saying something at odds with reality. And it's like Rhonda Burns, and so they tie a little red string around their fingers and they go in and they say, okay, like now we're just going to say the opposite of reality, and whoever believes us, and that's who our target audience is, right? It's it's the old P.T. Barnum bit. There's a sucker born every minute, and you just happen to be walking along at the right time. And so you get to this meeting, Zelensky and Trump, and that doesn't go very well. But Trump was very nice, and there was no crisis moment like in the first part. And I think that really subverted the British expectation. The British really expected Zelensky to receive another thrashing. See, whenever Zelensky gets a thrashing from Trump, he's isolated and wholly dependent on the British side of things. And what the British then did immediately, see, what they had a script. And oftentimes what happens, Tom, is elements of the script still are fulfilled or worked through, even though some foundational piece of it didn't materialize in reality. Like we've seen that over the decades, when Syria, Ukraine 10 years ago was going back and forth, there would be a false flag or a provocation. Even though that wouldn't materialize, they would still do the thing that's supposed to be springboarded from that in Ukraine or back in Syria, right? So you had the British press come out just as we forecast, saying elections in Ukraine, should we, and the British began to invest further into their electoral commission in Ukraine. And there was lots of journalism right after that, or editorials right after the Zelensky-Trump meeting, that there needs to be, or in between Alaska and that and thereafter, that there needs to be elections in Ukraine. And that's the pressure on Zelensky. I think that Putin and Trump are very happy with Zelensky in there, and Zelensky's happy about that too, right? I mean, because he has his own reasons. He has no way out but through. Like he needs this war to expand, Tom. This is Project 2029. This is to restart the war in 2030 or 2031 in the U.S. under a Democrat or maybe Vance, I don't know, but someone other than Trump, right? Whoever they can get in there, right? And to keep the war going without recognizing anything that Russia has. So what I thought was crazy, man, was this total gaslighting the public about what the terms and the concepts of de jure and de facto mean. Like what you're seeing bantied about from the Ukrainian side is they're considering recognizing or handing to Russia de facto recognition that they have these parts of Ukraine. I'm like, no, the word de facto is not subject to your
interpretation.
This is like the tree fell and made a noise whether the fuck you were there or not. You know what I mean? Like this is de facto means de facto, like if you can't hand someone de facto recognition, what do you can hand someone de jure recognition for sure. But what is de facto is the fact that they have Kherson, the fact that they have Zaporozhye, the fact that right. So it's like, so what we might consider. So they're just going around in circles and gaslighting the whole public, and the media's dutifully followed this duty of this obligation to pretend that these words have these new meanings. It reminds me so much of like when they redefined vaccine, when they redefined pandemic, when they redefined, we're like. We live in the age of euphemisms where like some generation of people that have lived came from a time of affluence when the empire was solid and could afford all this stupidity. That you had a generation of people just walk in and start thinking that they were the first ones to ever consider that if you use a euphemism that you've redefined the thing, like I didn't kill you, I just accidentally manslaughtered you, it's like, what are you talking about, right? So this is like redefining words, playing games, and obviously what the Russians proposed made sense. You've got this retarded piece coming out in the Atlantic the other day saying it seems that Witkoff was incompetent because he didn't really understand what Putin was saying when he said that they would freeze the conflict for Zaporozhye and Kherson and agree, that they're not going to pursue, for the time being, they're not going to pursue recognition of that as de jure Russia. And that Witkoff was confused because he thought that meant they were going to withdraw from those regions, even though their conversation was silent on that, even though no one was there in that conversation. But that's according to the Atlantic, according to two people that were familiar with what three other people thought about it on condition of anonymity. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So that's what, I mean, I don't know about you, Tom, but like when I was in high school, and you're learning like in maybe 9th or 10th grade English, and you're learning like journalism is who, what, where, when, and why, right? You can never have an anonymous source unless it's like a real national security thing of a real,
Right.
and even that's questionable. But just like every fucking side theory now is anonymous, and they just publish them like it's news. And that's legit. Yeah, that's
well. This is the. I mean, consider the source. Obviously, the Atlantic is the source. The Atlantic is the message, which is that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, which is ultimately that this is what they want you to believe, and then they got to the shaping operations, Joaquin, have only intensified to the level of absurdity, as you pointed out. My standard answer to all of that is, well, commies love to play word games because that's how they redefine their revolutionary bent. And these are Trotskyites, these are neocons, and that's their raison d'etre. They always operate under these rules. And then so now, I mean, the reality is that, as you said, Russia has this stuff on the ground. What Trump is trying to get everybody to do is to accept reality that you've lost these things. If you don't want to lose more, but all you have to do is come in and give us troops and we'll win. Yes, that's true. And we don't want to do that.
Right.
But we don't want to do that. Why? Because we don't want to be enemies with Russia, and we don't want to start World War III, and we don't want to, we don't want to see nukes fly. You're going to have to accept this, little terrier. That's just the way this works. Now, that little terrier in Kiev who refuses to submit is backed by what he thinks is a big dog in London and Brussels. The problem for Zelensky and for the problem for everybody is that they have no influence. And interestingly enough, Politico.eu, I just saw this morning, matter of fact, and let me see if I can find it because I tweeted it out, said this is a very interesting admission from them this morning. They said, a weakened Europe may find itself tomorrow as a hunted animal after 2 centuries of the West setting the tone. Like, that's Politico.eu. Like, they're admitting that they've lost and that the help are getting uppity. And like, that's the way this is working. And, and so they're beginning to accept the fact and they're trying now to rally. Now they're in rally the troops mode. How can we continue to set this narrative going forward? At the same time, we have all these other conflicts that they're stoking around the world, which is where I want to shift things at this point. But I think it's clearly obvious that Trump and Putin, we're on the same page. Trump and Putin were trying to figure out a way to create American rapprochement. The symbolism of Alaska is absolutely overwhelming the entire thing. The only obstacle to this is clearly the people who say they want peace because they were forced to say so and then schemed for war the minute they left the room.
Right. And the Russians are aware of this. So they're like, we're not interested in the ceasefire. Right. They're very clear about this game. So, yeah, I sent you along that Atlantic piece, but I know we're not reading news here, but I just thought, one thing that jumped out at me from that Atlantic piece. So this is from like yesterday or something like that. And they're saying that there's mostly confusion at this point. A top European official told us Officials interviewed for the story spoke on the condition of anonymity because details of the deliberations remain largely private. Well, apparently not. It's not clear what what it's not clear what Putin told Witkoff or Trump, or if they understood him properly. It's a puzzle we're all trying to solve. I have another idea, another proposal, Tom. I think that their job is to not fucking understand what's going on. Like the more they can just, it's the comprehension fallacy, right? It's kind of like, I don't understand what you're saying. Like, well, that doesn't invalidate what's being said. Like you can, playing dumb doesn't change the logic of, I mean, it looks like you're the one with the problem because, Russia is not even asking for a ceasefire or peace. This is not even on their radar screen. This is like you are trying to sue for peace in the language of neoliberalism, which sounds like you want a ceasefire, but we already know that this is you suing for peace, but you're unable to, right? You're unable to sue for peace because they have basically it's like an MLM, fucking pyramid scheme to keep the war going. And as soon as that's clear, it's like everyone's fucking broke, So they're like
no, and that's the other thing. You gotta remember that the other angle, and you just brought it up kind of obliquely. I don't know if you meant to or not, but that this is something like my friend Alex Grainer and I have talked about for a long time, and Alex did some very great work on it last year about the amount of debt that is tied to and who's on the hook for guaranteeing the debt that was put into Ukraine. The other thing is that any legal de jure transfer of property ultimately to Russia invalidates any old contracts or any secret agreements. And it's not like the Brits don't have secret agreements with people all over the fucking place like they do all the time, that that they're on the hook for if this property is transferred to Russia from Ukraine and they have no legal basis for it. Those contracts are all null and void, and damn well that means that they're on the hook for the damages for those contracts getting liquidated, because who in their right mind would lend the British money to prosecute a war in Ukraine and not expect some kind of some return, kind of offsetting risk. I mean, there's some collateral for that, right? And ultimately, if the collateral goes away because the property's gone, then the debt is bad. And that's and I think that one of the things that's been interesting to me, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, watch the U.S. gilt bond spread, because the market starts sniffing these things out. Ultimately, this is the lesson I've learned over the years from Martin Armstrong. And, you start taking it to the bank. And, oh, by the way, the US UK 10-year spread is now over 50 basis points. Well, here's a number for you. And I've said it before. When that number reaches 60, British governments tend to fail.
Interesting.
Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, both times the US UK bond spread bumped out to about 60 basis points, and somehow a government needed to be changed. And that's how we got Sunak in the first place. And then we got Starmer. So now I have to ask the question, if this is an open secret, who's pushing on the spread? Who's trying to make this happen? Now we watch the other side of the story of why Starmer is so adamant about destroying British pride in themselves, and why he's going after people flying the St. George Cross, and why that. And you're starting to see this upswell of English pride at this moment in time. That, I hate to say it, folks, but because I agree with this one, this may just as well be an operation as anything else, and someone's, and it's all kind of coming together. So, like, fifth generational warfare can be played by the good guys and the bad guys. And this is one of the things that libertarians need to get their fucking heads around. This is the way the world actually works. And this is what we should actually be analyzing the world within. And, it's an interesting thing. So moving off of Ukraine, I just told you about a little bit about the potential counter revolution over in England. But dude, my every day I wake up and I get inundated by my community and the people I interact with about what's going on in the Balkans. And no matter how much I try to learn about the Balkans, and people try to say it's really simple, I'm like, no, it's really simple to you. You're Serbian.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, no offense, but I don't get it. I mean, I do get it somewhat, but there's a lot going on, and if I don't understand it, then certainly the audience doesn't understand it. So it's clear that the EU and the Brits are trying to, gin up another front in this war in that region.
Yes.
Do your best to try and break down as much of it as you can into bite-sized chunks so that people can get a sense of it, and I can get a sense of it, because I would really appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah. So that's the reason that I'm actually here in the region, and that really is my area of specialization in security studies and IR and color revolutions. And in coming here and landing on the ground, so to speak, to start my operation, the my understanding of things and my own forecast, so to speak, was not that the conflict would begin in Ukraine, but that the conflict would begin in the Balkans, in the West Balkans, surrounding former Yugoslav countries, involving them. And so I was wrong in that it didn't pop off. But as the mechanisms in Ukraine were then started in late 2014, 15, a lot of the pressure on Serbia also was happening at the same time. So from my analysis at the time was that the Atlanticist would go for the lowest hanging fruit. And mind you, at this time, which would be Serbia, not Russia, right? And mind you, at this time, that what was happening is there was no sense of a figure named Trump on the horizon or on the scene. We're dealing like purely with Obama and then maybe fucking Romney or somebody, like, so this never ending neoliberal shit. So it really looked like Serbia was going to be the military target, lowest hanging fruit. Europe at that time certainly had the military potential to like take on little Serbia. How this Russia thing happened, we understand now, but I think it makes sense, how I was wrong. But that's where I am here in Serbia. And there has been, during the Biden administration, all of the kind of pressures that had eased a little bit under Trump. They really did ease significantly under Trump. I mean, it was palpable, the lack of tension in the air during those 4 years. And I say this as someone that has criticisms of Trump about a lot of stuff. I'm an American citizen, a lot of stuff going on. I'm not on board with everything. I don't have TDS, but I don't have TSS. I don't have Trump suffocancy syndrome either, right? But I'm clear about the facts about what has happened in the Balkans. So there's the main pressure. There's three real strong pressure points that are happening. Understanding that the war in Ukraine is part of the overarching, reality, and that is where you have the Sarajevo government. Bosnia Herzegovina is one pressure point. Then you've got in the south, you have the Albanian Kosovo territory in the south. That's a pressure point. And then you have a liberal nationalist alliance, which I've long described in my writing and works for the past 15 years as being the way that you do color revolutions in post-communist states. You need an alliance of the liberals and the nationalists, right? So, and so in the country, you have a liberal nationalist alliance. And over that time, of course, you get what are called neo movements, and you kind of have like a kind of a liberal nationalism that emerged as a kind of like hybrid of these pre-existently two poles that had to come together, although always discordantly and with lots of contradictions, because obviously the nationalists and the liberals want very different outcomes. They just both want this government out. The truth is that this government is also a liberal nationalist alliance. So that just, in other words, all the political scientists would agree that the Foursquare metric of political thought in Serbian mind circulates around this liberal nationalism, so to speak. So, so you've had this, you had, of course, the many different things that have come out about what's going on in the country. That's the internal pressure. That seems to be, it seems that the U.S. has almost no role now in undermining the Serbian government today from the outside. The NGOs and groups that are working in Serbia are tied to the British and to the Germans. And then, of course, you have Ukrainians. We have about between 600,000 and 800,000 Russians, and like liberal Russians and Ukrainians that have moved to Serbia since the special military operation began in Ukraine a couple years ago. So they're not supposed to be attending these protests, but how would you always know? I mean, that's a lot of people, and they're mostly all in Belgrade. I mean, the population of Belgrade basically grew by about 30% or 25% almost overnight. So rents doubled and tripled, cost of living issues that create color revolution situations. And the very migrants from Russia and Ukraine themselves are the ones protesting about the conditions that they've created by their arrival in part, So it's like, what the fuck? So, you know, but in terms of what you're hearing from folks or maybe in your audience, maybe there's something more pointed that you want to draw out for me then.
Yeah, it's what I'm getting at here is it's clear that there's a push for this. We have upcoming elections in Bosnia Herzegovina, or they're trying to do snap elections there
Yes,
in order
with
to.
Dodik, yeah.
So if I understand correctly, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but
Sure.
you have basically what amounts to two different. You have a group, Republic Srpska, that is mostly Serb, and the way this snap election is going to work itself out is to dominate those Serbs and pull them away from Serbia, the other nationalities that exist within the other ethnicities that exist within the thing, within Bosnia Herzegovina, and that's all being backed. Obviously, that whole process is being backed by the British. So that's just one angle on this. There's other things. Yes. Alex Craner the other day brought up Albania, and and the weirdness that the Brits have entered into mutual defense agreements with all these different groups, none of whom like each other, and it would be like Texans and Californians getting together to go after Washington in a civil war, like they tried to shove down our throats and pre-program us into last year. That's not happening. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So kind of speak to what's going on in that. Let's start with that part of it, and then that'll help make some sense.
Yeah. So the British and the Germans put together a military alliance recently to confront Serbia. So this is how by the way, this is like not an alternative history here, and this is not a conspiracy theory. So there's an Albania, Croatia, Bosnia military alliance, and then in response to that, you have the Serbian Hungarian alliance with obviously they're supported by Russia, and then a soft partner is Slovakia. And so this is how things are kind of facing. Yeah. And what had happened is you had the Dayton Accords in the middle 90s that was part of the conclusion of that part of the conflict, the Third Balkans War, the Yugoslav Civil War. And the Dayton Accords basically established what you have today, the setup in Bosnia. And I think one of the reasons that when people are reading and trying to understand the way that these entities have been named lends towards misunderstanding. It's like worse than Belgium, and it's worse, right? Like, in other words, like you've got the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina does not refer to the whole federation, which includes Republika Srpska, right? Like the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina refers to what historically is called the Muslim and Croatian, or the Muslim Croat Federation, and that is Sarajevo, and generally Sarajevo. Sarajevo's supposed to be neutral, but it's not. It really is more the Muslim Croat Federation. So these would be Bosnian Muslims. These are people that were historically, in history, Serbian Orthodox or Croatian Catholic, or Croatian Orthodox or Serbian Catholics. You're talking about the Adriatic, and there's a mix there. But obviously, with the arrival of the Ottomans, and you had Islamicization in this part of Europe, so you have what they call them Bosniaks, so the Muslim Croat Federation has been trying to work to strip the autonomous Serbian Republic, Republika Srpska, of its autonomy, and to put them under a centralized government. And that's why they named it the Republic. The whole thing is called the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, because a republic can have a centralized form. The federation refers to not the federation. The federation refers to the Republic of the Muslim Croat Federation. So it's a mess linguistically, and I think that gets in the way of understanding because you read one word and you think you're talking about the whole thing. So maybe clearing up the language, and I'll just say like the Muslim Croat Federation and the Serbian entity, like that is easier than talking about Bosnia all the time, because there's Bosnian Serbs, there's Bosnian everything, right? There's Bosnian Croats, there's Bosnian Muslims. So it makes no sense to talk about Bosnia, right? But the what happened is there was a UN Security Council resolution that enshrined the Dayton Accords. And the language in that is about that in the transition post-war, like immediately, like a small number of years immediately, you were supposed to, the UN conceived of it that way. And you can see they conceived of it that way because of the language of the UN Security Council resolution itself. There's going to be a high commissioner that the UN Security Council resolution itself named who that is going to be. And they also created a body to help manage that. Because it was only believed that this would be 4-year, 8-year, 5-year, 7-year sort of thing. So what happened is, well, it's gone on since how many decades is this now? Since 95, 05, 15, 20, Jesus, 30 years. Wow. So the guy retired, what I mean, probably, dead now, rest his soul. Like, so the guy was like, dead now, and he retired, and they violated the UN Security Council resolution and used a body that was just to help govern the work of that high commissioner, and used that to select a new one, although the language in the Security Council resolution doesn't allow that, right? In other words, like things that it's silent on, you do not have the power to do it. This is not like you have the power to do things that it's silent on, right? So this has resulted in the guy there now is Christian Schmidt, and he was just basically picked by the German government. And there's no agreement with the U4 forces. There's no agreement with the structure of the Security Council resolution, which would include Russia and others, right? It's the whole UNSC. So this guy just basically has the power to override any judge, any legislation, or any president by writing a letter and saying what the law shall be. And as Dodik recently said, no one in recent history in Europe's last 200 years has ever had this power except for Adolf Hitler. You just like one man make the law. No judiciary, no legislature, no voting, nothing. No review, no appeal. So this is like, and so they invented the story that Dodik did something wrong. This is really about energy markets, right? We understand that you have a pipeline from Hungary that goes into Serbia, and from Serbia into Republika Srpska, and that energy into Republika Srpska, its capital is Banja Luka. So that's Dodik. Banja Luka is the capital. So Banja Luka and Dodik then funnel that. In that energy is what powers the Muslim Croat Federation, right? So as you picked up and learned from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the side that wants to actually sabotage it begins their attack by accusing the other side of wanting to cut them off. Like, think about how the Nord Stream 2 thing happened, right? So they're doing basically a political Nord Stream 2 right now, by trying to remove Dodik while accusing him of threatening to cut them off. Like, that's the reason they want him out, because he's threatening to cut them off. That threat has never emerged. He's never articulated that threat. That's not how this game works. Like, the more people that use Russian gas, the better, right? This is why it was Russia that didn't destroy Nord Stream. This is why it's the Ukrainians that have been attacking Ukrainian infrastructure and attacking the Druzhba oil refinery or gas refinery. So this is the background. This is the real reason they want Dodik out. Is that clear? Is that cohesive or coherent enough for you think? Yeah.
It's fascinating, and it's more detail than I was even hoping for, but that's good. It helps. Like, I was literally like at the territorial and ethnic level did I not understand what was going on, but you tying it back to the idea of, okay, so we need to end our reliance on European energy because Putin will threaten to cut us off, when he's never done a thing to ever want to do that other than make more pipelines into Europe in order to stitch everybody together so that would preclude war, right? And so they're doing the same thing, and they're using the same playbook. That, since people understand that playbook with Nord Stream 2 and South Stream and everything else, this makes sense to understand why they're doing what they're doing there in the Balkans. And you know, it's funny, they cannot allow any of this. They cannot allow Hungary and Slovakia, and now even Poland. I mean, I don't know if you realize, but just how much these countries have, basically said no to a NATO, to an expansion of the NATO's war in Ukraine, including now a split between the Polish new president and Donald Tusk, the prime minister. And
right.
So there's that angle. I think the attacks on the Druzhba pipeline, which is the one that provides oil from Russia to Slovakia and Hungary, has been bombed multiple times. The point of all of this is to stop the Russian flow so that you punish them for their lack of vision, as it were, to invoke Emperor Palpatine.
But this is Ukraine. That's not a NATO country that is engaged in terrorist attacks on NATO countries. Like, at this point in time, Hungary can invoke Article 5 on Ukraine. Like, if we want to talk about Article 5, you know what I mean?
No, you're absolutely right. And they absolutely could do that. And of course, it's the Europeans are basically saying, these attacks on your energy infrastructure and the cost of energy will end the minute you give us what we want. And they're like,
terrorism,
no. It's absolute terrorism. And this is
like the quid pro quo part makes it terrorism.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, your point about Ukraine attacking the Druzhba pipeline, and then Zelensky smirking about publicly about how Hungary needs to fall in line. Like, dude, like, if I were Viktor Orban, I'd go to NATO. I'd go to the next NATO meeting. And I'm invoking Article 5 against Ukraine. That's what I would do. And if Trump were there with Marco Rubio and the rest of them, you're like, yeah, sounds good.
And the funny flip side of this, Tom, is that although this pipeline transits through Ukraine to Hungary, in the arena of electricity production, Hungary produces electricity and then sells it to Ukraine. And without Hungary's electricity, like the whole west, like Lvov and the whole western part, and Kiev too, probably the whole western part of Ukraine would be a blackout. I mean, it would be. I mean, there's not even the infrastructure. It's not even like, they'd have to buy it from someone else. They would be 6 months, 18 months away from people having electricity again if Hungary cut them off. And yet they haven't done it, but they've mentioned that they could. Like, if you want to go crazy. And I'm looking at, they had their George Floyd moment already in Hungary. This is like connected to the drama with the TCC guys, who are the mobilizers on the streets in Ukraine, that people probably on Telegram have seen tons of, thousands, millions of videos of guys being brutalized. Millions is an exaggeration, but certainly you've seen tens of thousands of these cases over the past 2-3 years. I mean, there's 10 of them almost every day, like fresh ones. There's channels that just track them, because all these Ukrainians just have their little smartphones and they're recording these things happening, and citizens are jumping in trying to fight these guys. This is like the brown shirts or black shirts forcing guys into the army. And there was a report that went to the Rada in Ukraine, that of the reported cases of violence between the recruiters and the people that were reported, so this is not as big of a number as it might sound, but 20% of those people died in the conflict. 20% of the people they were trying to mobilize in reported major conflicts died. So it's probably more like 1% or 5%, because you have unreported, you have scuffles that are less serious or whatever. But of the major altercations, you have a 1 in 5 fatality rate. And those guys don't even get to the front. Like, they get killed by the TCC. So you've got broken necks, broken arms, and you're seeing reports of the front line in Ukraine right now being reinforced. They're sending in reinforcements, and it's actually the guys that are injured from other parts of the front. You've got reports of like, we're sending in reinforcements, and it's the guys that should be sent back to hospitals, and they're being sent to be finished off at this other location. So you've got guys that with, triage, their legs splint, whatever, tied up, and they're mobilizing mentally ill people. They're mobilizing, people that are slow. They're mobilized, and it's heartbreaking to see as a human being, like some poor retarded man who's got, a mind of a 5-year-old. He just wants to play with toys or something, and they've got him in a fucking, helmet and shit, and he's, gonna die tomorrow. This is, so I don't want to get too personally, but but obviously one cannot not be invested when you are looking at this conflict every day, like I am. Yeah. And the brutality of the recruiters of the TCC is going to be like the undoing of the whole regime. I mean, this is a huge piece in Zelensky's undoing in the Kiev regime. And so they mobilized this guy who was Hungarian, and they killed him in the mobilization. And that's been what the Hungarians have been, pushing on. And so that's their George Floyd. They're using like this one guy symbolizes, this whole phenomenon. And at the end of this, Ukraine might lose some regions in the west to Hungary.
I from the moment this thing started, I said Transnistria is going back. Not Transnistria. Transcarpathia is going back to Hungary. Lvov is going back to Poland. If they play this out to the bitter end, the Russians will sweep all the way to Odessa, and and this is the part that this is why I'm like, they cannot let this go. Meaning Davos, they can't let this go, because what they're really doing, Joaquin, and this is the part I think everybody needs to wrap their heads around. I think there are two competing forces at work here. There are the Davosian, old European colonialist city of London, call it what you will, I don't care. You have that faction that knows that the whole system is about to collapse. They need a war to cover the collapse. And they are saying, and they are under pressure, realizing that the United States, Russia, and China are out of this type of empire building, where they get to determine how empires rise and fall, that they get a seat at the new high table that's being set by Russia, China, and the United States. They see that, and they have moved into burn it to the fucking ground mode. Right? They are now the Joker. Some men just want to watch the world burn, because if I can't have it, you're not going to have it either. This is what you're seeing in England. This is what you're seeing in Ireland. This is what you're seeing in France. This is what you're seeing in Italy. This is what you're seeing all over that's why they're bombing churches. It's why they're killing. That's why they're activating kids on SSRIs to kill Christians in Minneapolis. It's why they're doing all of this, every bit of it. And we've covered all of these areas. Now let's talk about the replay of World War I that we're seeing in fucking Syria with the neo-Ottoman lunatic Erdogan. Because what I'm beginning to see, and I want you to either confirm or tell me I'm crazy, that what I see in the grand scheme of things, since Turkey moved into Syria, for all intents and purposes, they've moved into Damascus. And I saw a report. I don't remember where I saw it. I might have saw it on your Telegram feed. I might have saw it somewhere like that. That the Russians gave the order to Assad to just leave and let Turkey have it as a trap. Because the other competing narrative is, in order to stop World War III from actually happening, you have to liquidate the armies that were built over the last 30 years and the infrastructure built over the last 30 or 40 years to fight World War III. And the last major army left in the region is the Turkish military. So you sucker them into an expansionist war and police action that they cannot maintain. That's my 30,000 foot level take on it. And this morning we got the report that the Turks have cut off basically all relations with Israel over, quote unquote, over Gaza, and and the Israelis attacked Damascus the other night. So, the whole thing is being ginned up. And I think that the Brits are on both sides of the on both sides of this in order to try and get Trump to come in to save Israel's ass from the Turks. That's what I'm seeing. Tell me I'm crazy.
I think okay, you're crazy. No, but you're not. But you asked, no, but no. I know it makes for more compelling podcast if we could disagree on this. But I what you're sharing have been my own opinions as well, and it's clearly you have look, the Russians and the Iranians there in Syria, going back, to before the fall of Damascus, did have the wherewithal to put up a fight, and you would still have fighting just north of Damascus to this very day, right now,
Mhm.
if the Russians and Iranians went that direction with it. But at what cost? And that was really the gambit. That was really the thought that the Turks and their backers and others had, that the Russians would be compelled to do that, and instead they became victims of their own success. The Turks, like, in other words, by not putting up the fight, then they're now right up against Israel, right? And now you see Julani al-Shara, whatever he's going to go by tomorrow. Um, he's totally in over his head. He was not prepared for this. This was never supposed to happen, and he walked into this. Now he's like in the palace in Damascus, and he's he's getting fucked up by Israel, and that was supposed to be this was supposed to be more of an Afghanistan type of thing for Russia, there to be squeezed between these conflicting forces. And Russia has not very good relations with Israel these days, but their general posture is to have normal relations with Israel. And although they're not very good these days, and Israel's been very involved in Ukraine on the wrong side, and a few other arenas as well, like Russia isn't an anti-Israel state as a state, you see. And
Right.
and they, but for the Turks, you see, they have the largest army in NATO, and so much of what you've seen between NATO and Russia in Ukraine has been about demilitarizing. It's about powering down so much of this. I mean, a lot of the Israel-Iran 12-day war depowered Israel considerably, and they
Yes.
had been building up force potential for decades. And how much force potential did Israel expend in 12 days on Iran? Like, pretty considerable on the
Yes.
whole. And they've got billions and billions of damage in Tel Aviv. No one's even talking in the news about the craters in Tel Aviv and the destruction of the diamond exchange offices, and the stock exchange, and the Ministry of Defense offices, and the Shin Bet headquarters, and any number of things, and their underground bases. Iran wasn't missing in hitting parking lots. Those were underground bases that also have just billions, hundreds of millions and billions of damage. Where's that going to come from? And they're not even having a conversation about within Israel. It's like the hostages in Gaza and Yemen are serving as a weapon of mass distraction from an internal conversation about rebuilding billions of damage in Israel that Iran inflicted in 12 days. So it's and then you look at the model of like we said, with Ukraine and depowering, demilitarizing, and yet all of this has left Turkey, and Erdogan has been um, quite the Machiavellian, I guess is the word, Machiavellian, and he's the one that has profited the most and lost the least so far, and
Mhm.
middling in between, and he knew exactly what he was doing in terms of being the better option for Russia compared to anyone else. That's why Putin kept him from getting couped out. That's why the Russians
Right.
didn't go for the provocation with the over the skies of Syria when the Turkish Air Force shot down the Russian Air Force plane.
Right.
And these are things that clearly the Russians were like, this is the devil that we know. It's better than the
Hmm.
devil that we don't know. And And so Erdogan has very skillfully played this balancing act and this tension. But we saw just last night that the Russians decided to destroy the Turkish drone production concern
Yes.
inside of Ukraine. So I think
Yes.
that's a pretty definitive thing, you know. And of course, you have this corridor in Armenia, and you have the Azerbaijan and Iran drama. And what's going on is are the reformers in Iran trying to pivot again in some direction westward and appease, you know, not recognize that Azerbaijan, in fact, probably was helping Israel in the conflict against Iran so that they can avoid confronting that and avoid the snapback sanctions that would be inevitable if Iran were to be more transparent about what really happened with Azerbaijan and to, you know, have a politics that flowed from that. Then you would have, and of course, the Azerbaijan Israel relationship. I mean, if you were to look at the Azerbaijani military, it looks like Turkey and Israel had a baby, and in a sense, Azerbaijan is like the love child of Turkey and Israel at this point, you know.
Nice. Yeah.
So um, that's basically my read on things. So I think we're looking at a lot of the same angles.
Okay. To add to that a little bit, the color I want to put into this is is Trump getting Azerbaijan and Armenia together, and in effect, the United States taking control of that corridor as opposed to the British having or the Europeans having control of that energy corridor. I want you to think of it. I want you to think of it in those terms. It's almost like
Sure.
if Trump and Putin are working together to try and stabilize the entire region, better this devil in control of that corridor than the one that is in cahoots with supplying energy to Europe. Like, look, I can make a cynical argument that Donald Trump wants control of that corridor simply because he wants to control the energy flowing from the Caspian back into the Europeans. Now, remember that corridor and the Caspian pipeline that goes through there actually goes to Italy. And
Right.
remember also that everything that's going on in Libya and all of North Africa has been done, and Nord Stream 2 was built by the Germans. They wanted it so that they could, you know, cleave off Italy's ability to get gas from North Africa and then force gas flows through Germany and France into Italy and then have them bound down politically through gas. Well,
that's right. Yeah, because the Turk Stream goes to the Balkans, and the Turk Stream was the compromise after the EU passed the third energy package that destroyed the capacity of Blue Stream. So then so the Russian stream connects with the Turk Stream and then goes to the Balkans and then forms the Trans-Adriatic pipeline into Italy is what you're talking about.
And then there's also the Southern Gas Corridor that goes from the Caspian that feeds into that whole system as well.
Yes,
and that gas, that 10 billion cubic meters a year goes directly to Italy. So if you've got understand that the EU has always wanted to control the energy flow into Europe in such a way that their power center in Brussels has the ultimate lever over all of the member states, so that you can enforce unanimity and against their will. And that's we just discussed it with Hungary and Slovakia. We discussed it with Serbia and quote unquote Bosnia Herzegovina. Now we're talking about it with Italy. It's all Italy, Turkey. It's all the same thing. And note also that about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Erdogan came out and said it's a time now beyond time for the Turkey to join the European Union. Did you not see that?
Right. I mean, you figure with the Armenia corridor and Azerbaijan and the U.S. role in that, there had been some weird things going on for a number of years where Pashinyan had been, the optics looked pretty anti-Russian, but there were some things that were going on more granularly that looked like he was getting kind of pushed, that he was a little bit more malleable. And clearly what you're seeing is, Aliyev and Erdogan do not respect do not respect Pashinyan because they
Mm-mm.
understand that he is, they like what he's doing in the sense of it like works for them,
Right.
but nobody respects a traitor to their own people. It's like they
Right.
understand that his project is anti-Armenian and he's attacking the Armenian church and all these things. He's
Mm.
undoing Armenian identity from the inside. And what project, like who is he working for? Well, that's very interesting. But then you look at this corridor and handing it over to the Americans, and what does that really mean? Like, let's think about the rare earth elements in Ukraine and what it would mean for the U.S. to acquire those in the context of actually having a decent relationship with Russia and looking at what a post-conflict Ukraine would look like. So, for
Mm.
example, the monies that the city of London and their European cohorts had put into Ukraine, like it doesn't work if they lose the war, right?
Right.
But if the U.S. gets those, it works whether they win or lose. You see, like they
Mm.
have it with the Russians too. So why wouldn't the U.S. acquire this corridor, and why how could it wind up that the Russians benefit from this, or wind up if there was a change of government in Armenia that worked out better for Russia, then the Americans could also hand this corridor to the Russians, and you kind of get back to where you were, 10 years ago or 15 years ago with this.
I agree because it's very clear, and I've said it from the beginning that Pashinyan is absolutely a Soros color revolution,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
somehow this guy has been able to stay in power, even though he should have been removed ages ago. And he's somehow been able to survive like a cockroach, and so all of these things that have happened recently have put pressure on him again. Maybe this will be the time we finally get rid of him. Because, I mean, what the Russians really want is they want British influence ultimately out of all of the quote unquote stands. They want them out of Kazakhstan. They want it out of Azerbaijan, out of Armenia. They want it out of Uzbekistan, all of it. They want they have to end the strategy of destabilizing Russia's southern border. Like
Right.
Russia's underbelly, and it's been their strategy going back before Mackinder. Like why were the
Yeah,
British in
this is a
Afghanistan in the 1860s, right? Like it's
yes.
so you know when the easy read this morning is, oh look, Erdogan is joining the side of the righteous by isolating the evil Israel over their genociding the
Right.
Palestinians.
Right.
But no, what this is really about is the British liquidating both of their assets in order to try to get Trump to come in to save Israel from the big bad Turks. And everybody
Right.
gets it wrong because everybody wants to Juiceburg. No, and
Right.
I'm so fucking over it, man. I really am. Ugh.
Yeah, people are not seeing that this is like Erdogan has played this game so many times. This
Yes.
happened after the second Intifada. This happened. Turkey's been playing this game of acting like they care about the Palestinians or that they're going to do something about it, and there are, because people are human beings, and a lot of voters in Turkey are decent people that care about Turkey and also care about the region, and they don't want to see Palestinians hurt. And so Erdogan
Mm-hmm.
plays to that constituency,
Yep.
but it's totally cynical. It never materializes, and it won't materialize, and yet it's being used as a boogeyman. And this is, I mean, if you want to get into the history of how many times the British have played both sides against the middle or whatever, this is like, and in fact, you would have to find a conflict in which they did not support both sides. You see what I'm saying? Like those
Oh
are
yeah,
the
no,
ones that
absolutely.
stand
Over
out,
the
right?
last
You know what I
250
mean?
years, is like that's very obvious. And
Right.
the most salient one to this current conflict is the build up to World War One and Richard Poe's work talking about how the goal of World War One was to break up both the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, and it was largely successful.
Right, right. I mean, this was the game that the British played, playing footsie with Hitler. And I mean, you had throughout the 20s, the British had policy was, very similar to their policy leading up to World War One, with the Russians and the Germans. And they did they signed in 1927 the Anglo-Soviet trade agreement, while also pursuing very robust relations with Weimar Germany. And then after, 32 or so, they had very good relations with Hitler's Germany. And they continued this course for so long that, many in the German Nazi establishment, as, folks know, this is something everyone knows, we're convinced that the English would be along with the Germans. And it obviously didn't shape up that way. And obviously people understand that the goal from the British perspective was to have the Germans and the Soviets wear each other out, and to very similar to Iran Iraq. I mean, this was the Iran Iraq war on a larger scale in World War II, right? In the 80s, the British were and the Americans were providing support and intelligence and weapons to either or both sides. And how many millions of Iranians and Iraqis died in that war? Like millions of soldiers. At a certain point, the Iranians had to recruit from teenagers. So this is again, Tom, like we're saying, you have to show me the times that the British didn't do this thing that we're saying that they're doing with Israel and Turkey.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it's so very obvious. I think we covered most of the things that I wanted to get done this morning, and
excellent.
Yeah, and I want to respect both my time, your time, and the listeners' time. At a certain point, there's a lot to digest in this podcast, a lot of moving parts in this, and I really appreciate you coming in, jumping in, doing the thing, man. It's as always, it was a pleasure and an honor. So, with that said, let everybody know where you hang out these days. I like to call you the most, I like to call you the most canceled man in geopolitics. That's still, that's still set in the friggin' zeitgeist. It's pretty fucking amazing, actually. So,
yeah, it's behind the scenes, but you can find me at New Resistance on Telegram, Patreon, Xoaquin F on Patreon. Just my name, Joaquin F for Flores, and I'm doing a live stream, much less structured and planful or professional than yours, Tom, I have to say. But I just kind of speak from the cuff and whatever's on my mind, and and then my little kids run in the room or something, and then I have to deal with that.
I used to do that.
Yeah. So that's. So that's it, man. I appreciate being on with you and being able to dig into these. It was like four very big subjects we did. So
I appreciate you doing so, and I appreciate you sticking through all of it, man. I really do, because at this moment in time, trenchant and dispassionate analysis of what's happening is what we need as more than anything else, because the amount of chum that's in the waters out there in this fifth generational mis and disinformation space that's only getting worse with AI. The only way we continue to cut through all that is to just have conversations, whether we agree or we disagree. So with that said, I'm TFL1728 over on Twitter. You can follow me at Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns to sign up for the newsletter and all of that. And with that said, we're out. So you guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.